And welcome back again to the second part of research methodology. My name is Stephen Harrison and I shall be taking you through this particular class, which is now the third in this particular group. Today we're going to be looking at primary data again, but using semi-structured, in-depth and group interviews. So interviewing people within your area that you hope to get the information for your research, and how to deal with them and what we can expect and how to go about it. So let's dive in and have a look at this. So the definition: an interview is a purposeful discussion between two or more people. Sounds obvious. So a couple of types of interviews: the semi-structured, in-depth, the structured and the group interview. So different types of interviews that can be used. Forms of interviews: standardized or non-standardized. So the standardized ones are interviewer administered questionnaires. Probably seen these where you get stopped in the middle of the street with people asking you a group of questions. Well, that kind of a thing. There's not really much that they can deviate from. Non-standardized, one-to-one, where you're dealing with one-to-one people, or one-to-many. On the one-to-one, face-to-face interviews, telephone, or internet and intranet mediated. On the one-to-many, group interviews, focus groups, for example. And again, now thanks to Zoom, etc., we can have the internet group interviews as well, and also focus groups online. So if we look at the difference between the structured interviews, where you use a questionnaire based on a predetermined and standardized or identical set of questions, these are what we refer to as interviewer administered questionnaires. The benefit of that, obviously, as you can see, it's one interviewer can do, anybody can do. It's not just required for you to understand that it's literally going through and answering the questions as per the box. So anybody can actually do them for you. You don't actually have to do them yourself. Semi-structured interviews: the researcher will have a list of themes and questions to be covered, although these may vary from interview to interview. This means you may omit some questions in particular interviews, given them a specific organizational context that is encountered in relation to the research topic. The order of questions can also be varied depending on the flow of the conversation. This obviously requires a little bit more work and probably requires you personally to do every one. On the other hand, additional questions may be required to explore your research questions and objectives given the nature of events within a particular organization. Unstructured interviews are informal. You would use these to explore in depth a general area in which you are interested. We therefore refer to these as in-depth interviews. So there is no predetermined list of questions. To work through this in this situation, although, you need to have a clear idea about the aspect or aspects that you want to explore. The interviewee is given the opportunity to talk freely about events, behavior, and beliefs in relation to the topic area. So that this type of interaction, sometimes called non-directive, it's been labelled as informant interview, since it is the interviewee's perception that guide the conduct of the interview. In comparison, a participant or respondent interview is one where the interviewer directs the interview and the interviewee responds to the questions of the researcher. We can also differentiate between types of interview related to the nature of the interaction between the researcher and those who participate in this process. Interview may be conducted one-to-one between you and a single participant, face-to-face, telephone, internet, or intranet. There may be other situations where you can conduct a number of participants to explore an aspect of your research through a group of discussions that you facilitate. So we're looking at interview and types of research. In an exploratory research study, in-depth interviews can be very helpful to find out what is happening and to seek new insight. Semi-structured interviews may be used in relation to an exploratory study. In descriptive studies, structured interviews can be used as a means to identify general patterns. In an exploratory explanatory study, semi-structured interviews can be used in order to understand the relationship between variables, such as those revealed from a descriptive study. Structured interview may also be used in relation to an explanatory study in a statistical sense. So here we can see when it's maybe the best use of each type of these types of interviews. So each type of research category. So as we can see, for a structured one, descriptive and explanatory, semi-structured for exploratory and explanatory, and unstructured for exploratory types of research. Non-standardised or qualitative interviews. So these have 4 key aspects: the purpose of the research, the significance of established personal contact, the nature of the data collection questions, and the time required and completeness of the process. So things that we need to consider with the quality of data that we're getting from people, especially if we are interviewing people: reliability, forms of bias, validity, and generalizability. So if we consider the reliability, do you think that if you've ever asked anyone, they've always told you the truth? That's just something to consider. The importance of preparation. The 5 P's. Prior planning prevents poor performance. Not quite the version I had. Prior planning prevents poor performance. So I had an additional C. But I think the poor performance probably covers it enough. So some associated issues. Interviewers' level of knowledge of the things that you're discussing. Be aware of that before you even start. Level of information supplied to interviewees. Do they need to know what it is that you're, or the reason that you're asking them these questions, or not? Is it best not to know? Creating an interview guide and the appropriateness of the location. Although these things may sound rather obvious, they're not. Just in the question of the location, you have to understand if you're discussing with something about work while people are actually working, may not be the best place for it. If you're doing it in the middle of a high street, asking students as they're rushing into school, maybe for an exam or something, again, not the best place for it. So again, the location has to be considered very seriously. The researcher's appearance, how you are dressed. Quite obviously, people have their own ideas of the kind of person you are based on your appearance. So if you're stopping the general public, how are they perceiving you before they even would, maybe they would not want to particularly talk to you. Shaping the interview, your opening comments, how you actually start, whether you're diving straight into a question. Can I ask you a question? Do you work here? Do you study here? Etc. Rather than something a little easier for them. And the approach to questioning, clarity and reducing bias, and the use of critical incident technique. Some more issues: appropriate interview behavior, verbal and non-verbal, how you either react. If somebody says, oh yes, I think Donald Trump did do a good job, you should not sort of go, really, and slap your head afterwards, maybe. Attentive listening skills and testing understanding, an approach to data recording, notes or tape, and cultural differences and bias. Maybe somebody would only ask the men, or you would only ask the women, something like that, that kind of bias that we can see in certain people. So interviewing competence. There are several areas where you need to develop and demonstrate competence in relation to conduct of semi-structured and in-depth research interviews. So the areas are opening the interview, using appropriate language, questioning, listening, testing and summarizing understanding, recording and dealing with difficult participants, and then recording the data. So the different approaches to questions: open questions, probing questions, and specific and closed questions. So obviously, open questions will allow participants to define and describe the situation or event. An open question is designed to encourage the interviewee to provide an extensive and developmental answer and may be used to reveal attitudes or obtain facts. It encourages the interview to reply as they wish. An open question is likely to start with or include one of the following: what, how, or why. Why do you study at this particular university? Might be an example of that. And if you think about it, the kind of answers that you could expect from that, how many possible answers are there just to that one question? Don't forget, you have to prepare how you're going to actually list the answers afterwards. So maybe you should think about having something a little bit more specific. Probing questions can be used to explore responses that are of significance to the research topic. They may be worded like open questions, but request a particular focus or direction. Specific and closed questions. So these types of questions are similar to those used in structured interviews. They can be used to obtain specific information or to confirm a fact or opinion. So usually things, do you agree with what this particular school is doing on that? It may be a yes or a no answer. So the advantages and disadvantages of audio recording interviews, which is sometimes useful where if the questions are a bit more open, somebody may need to record them and write them all down afterwards, which is one of the reasons for doing it. So it allows the interviewer to concentrate on the questioning and listening, allows the questions formulated at an interview to be accurately recorded for use later, can be re-listened to by the interviewer. Accurate and unbiased record is provided, allows direct quotes to be used, and there is a permanent record for others to be used. Great advantages, however, may adversely affect the relationship between the interviewee and interviewer, possibly of focusing on the audio recorder. May inhibit some interviewers' responses and reduce reliability. People feel that if they know it's their voice and they may want to criticize a particular thing, they may choose not to say anything and change what they would otherwise have said. The possibility of a technical problem, things not actually working as you want at the time, something very common, and the time required to transcribe the audio recordings. Taken in inordinate amount of time to actually write down what someone has said afterwards so that you can present it in a document. Interviewing competence. So some other things to consider. Dealing with difficult participants. Those that maybe feel they have a particular thing they would want to say that may not be relevant to you. Things that you ask, what would it take to improve the quality of this course? And someone might say that that they gave all the students pizzas or something not terribly relevant or useful. Managing the resources, the actual logistics and the time obtained to do all of this. Obtaining the participants' permission for interview records, whether it be written or recorded. They may feel that they don't want it recorded. Additional forms of interviews, we have group interviews, focus groups, telephone interviews, and obviously those mediated through the internet. Forms of electronic interviews, asynchronous and synchronous. Those done that aren't time-based, that are not actually done sort of live email and internet forums, and synchronous in a chat room where the discussion is going on at the same time. So a summary of these types of primary research. Use of non-standard qualitative interviews should generate rich and detailed data if it's done right. Different types of interviews are useful for different research purposes. Qualitative interviews are generally categorized as in-depth, structured, and semi-structured. Research design may incorporate more than one type of interview. Using qualitative interviews is related to the research strategy and data collection questions. Establishing personal contact with subjects and the length of time required are significant factors. And data quality issues, interviewer competence, resource management are important considerations. And face-to-face, individual, group and focus groups and electronic interviews can all be advantageous. So that now concludes another part of our research methods. We still have more to do, so I'll see you in the next class for that. So thank you very much for listening, and see you shortly.